Like, I used to work at a comic book store back in the 90s, and it was really easy to get indie comics. There were so many indie comic distributors, and they're all gone. There's a few places, but they're very, very small. Like, my stuff is carried by Birdcage Bottom, which is in New York, and they deal with a lot of comic shops in the New York area, and they do online sales. But aside from them, there's a couple. There's Spit in Half, Domino, Wig Shop here in Denver. There's Wig Shop. Jeff, he's great. But a lot of these smaller distributors deal with very specific types of comics, like niche comics. Like, Domino is a very arty comic, so they do more art comics rather than and I do slice of life stuff. So it doesn't.
Let me ask you this: one publisher that you work with on the regular Tinto,
they publish the Queen City.
They do everything except superhero comics. Are you of that mindset?
Yeah, I don't. I'm totally uninterested in superhero comics. I am not 12 years old.
Nice.
I grew up with superhero comics, sure, and every now and then I like looking back at the old 70s and 80s superhero comics that I grew up with, but I have no interest in what's going on with the superheroes today.
Good man. Here with one of Denver's deepest, a cartoonist, a historian, 2017 Dink Best of Show Award winner.
It was.
Cheers, Groovy TV.
Yeah.
So I must be chatting with Karl Christian Krumpholz.
Krumpholz.
Yeah.
Thank you. You don't pronounce the P, but you add a T.
Let me ask you this. For a person who does three names, is that something that adds to the artistic character? Is it symmetry?
I guess it does. The reason I use my middle name is my father was Karl Krumpholz. So it was when I was young, my mom would yell Karl Christian. So I always went by Karl Christian Krumpholz.
Hey, KCK is pretty strong.
Yeah.
Author of Queen City, I suppose a collected history of architecture and peoples in Denver?
Yeah, Denver, Colorado. It was my little way of learning about the city.
Let's go elevator pitch to your best place to catch a sunset in Denver.
Actually, just in this neighborhood. I rarely go outside this neighborhood. I live in the Capitol Hill, Cheeseman Park neighborhood, and when I'm walking or leaving a bar and it's that right time of day, you look down 13th or even Colfax, especially Colfax, because you can see the mountains all the way out to Golden, and if you get it at that right moment and you can see the lights of traffic going up into the hills, it's pretty wondrous.
Well, if we're talking where we are, that would be the Wild Corgi Pub, a place you're no stranger to.
This was back when it was Gabor's. It used to be called Gabor's. This was the second bar. My girlfriend at the time, my wife, when I visited Denver for the first time, brought me, and it was Gabor's until early 2012. So, oh my God, it's been going for almost 10 years. That's wild. Yeah, and I illustrated the front of Gabor's for the Queen City book, and the print is actually hanging behind the bar here. And then it became, I think it was 2016, it reopened as the Marion Street Pub for a couple years. One of the managers of Marion Street Pub bought it and turned it into the Wild Corgi. This place looks nothing like it used to when it was Gabor's, except for a vague skeleton, but it's a completely different bar.
Yeah. We're catching some of that art right now.
Yeah.
On your website, cartoons, comics, and of course cocktails. You have a signature beverage here, which is, honestly, I don't know if there's a bigger flex for an artist.
Yeah, it's called the Karl Fuck You.
What is in that beverage, my friend?
It's simple whiskey soda bitters, and the story goes, I've been drinking this whiskey soda, just whiskey soda bitters, and so the bartenders here just called it the Karl, and one, about a year or two ago, the owner, so it was post-pandemic, had been post-pandemic, then the owner was like, well, here's your little diet old-fashioned, because it's basically a diet old-fashioned. And I said, it's called the Karl. Fuck you. And he's like, okay. And it's on the menu now. It's called the Karl Fuck You.
That's why I was born.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying the pages of Queen City, of course, make one of those up. Now, I believe on the pages of Queen City, you've said that you're actually a fan of the brutalist style of architecture.
I am. I find the brutalist, it's, it might be the contrarian to me. I find it fascinating. A lot of people find it just like dingy and ugly. I find it just absolutely beautiful. There's not a lot of brutalist buildings in Denver. There's a lot more on the East Coast. But I always liked it because they're these just basically massive concrete blocks. And the thing about brutalism that I learned, aside from it just looking cold and Soviet, I kind of like, I just kind of like it. But the idea of like brutalist, the reason these concrete buildings were built is because they were wicked cheap to make, because it's just straight concrete. But the thing is, you got to be a great architect, because basically you've got to get it done in one. You got to pour that concrete, and if you pour it wrong, you got to knock it down and start all over again. So it's not like other buildings which were slowly, built up. That's why their brutalist buildings are so cheap and were used for a lot of governmental buildings, because how inexpensive it was. But the thing is, you had to be spot on as an architect to get it done right.
Giving some love to the concrete workers.
Yeah.
Artists go back and forth. Obviously, people don't like to draw background. But in the Queen City, your buildings are characters. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, it's completely fair. And I also hated drawing backgrounds for my comics for the longest time.
Take your time. The 3 buildings in Denver that resonate with the most character for you.
All right, so I would say...
And they have to grace the pages of Queen City, obviously.
Obviously. No. You know what I would say? There's 1 or 2 buildings that I'm like, wow. The first one that springs to mind is the Bastions building over on East Colfax. It's this beautiful mid-mod, single level. The other building that's exactly the same is Tom's Diner. It's like this 1950s squat. Both are, Tom's Diner was a diner, Bastions is a restaurant. Beautiful mid-century building, almost looks like a pagoda. And I find that fascinating. But what I would say is, less than buildings, what fascinates me are the sort of googie signs, the neon signs that you see up and down Colfax. The one that jumps out to me is right next to one another, same owners, so they're right next to one another, is the Satire Lounge and Pete's Kitchen. And it's this beautiful, again, mid-century neon. Pete's Kitchen has the little chef flipping a pancake. The Satire has this beautiful rotating, blinking light bulbs going up and down the sign. That I find fascinating and lovely, and almost like a memory of a forgotten time. Coming from the East Coast, a lot of these places are gone. You don't see it. And so when I moved to Denver and seeing this stuff from 40, 50, 60 years ago, still preserved and still operating, that's fantastic. And yes, for a third one I would say I'll go with another building. It's a building that doesn't get a lot of love, but I don't think Colfax would be the same without it. And it's been given a lot of names, but the one we always called it was the Storage Castle on Colfax. It's over by the Lions Lair, right by the Satire and Pete's Kitchen. It's this massive concrete brick bunker on the skyline that looks like a massive medieval fortress. I've never been in this building, and it's a massive, that you sort of rent little storage units, and it's been that way for at least 100 years. This building, there's photos of Colfax from like the 1920s, and that building... Yes. Do you need it? Oh, no, you're good. And that Storage Castle building has been there for almost 100 years. Now, the story I heard was the person that built this storage castle owned a bunch of places downtown that burned down, wooden storage units that burned down. So he's like, hell, I'm going to build a brick one and it won't burn down. And it's this massive, and it's in the Queen City book, beautiful, weird, out of place, massive brick.
I believe you dropped the gem in Queen City about the Brown Palace being the first fireproof building.
I believe that's true, yeah.
Ooh.
Brown Palace is one of those places, it's like, it's from like, I think the 1890s. And it's like, that's the place the president stays at when he comes into town. Again, it's a beautiful old school building, and it's one of those places that, my wife is from here, so she tells me stuff like, when they have the stock show, the prize-winning steer spends a couple days in the lobby of the Brown Palace, which is just this weird sort of disorientation of this beautiful stained glass with people having high tea, and there's a steer just right there, and that to me screams Denver.
You might be looking at a picture of me enjoying high tea right now. We talked the Brown Palace, so let me stay old world with you for one last building. What old world building inspires the most curiosity in you, or tells the most stories to you?
Downtown, I would say it would be Union Station. It's a beautiful building going back to, if I remember correct, like the 1870s, and it's been renovated so many times. That's another building that if it got knocked down, Denver would definitely lose something. That idea of old Denver, what it used to look like as a sort of stopover as you're traveling cross country, where that's where you had all the good stories.
You came from the East Coast, I came from the West Coast, and we might be a couple modern Kerouacs, to be honest. What did Denver, through its architecture, teach you?
Well, the reason I did the Queen City book originally was because there was all these brilliant places that I discovered coming to Denver that were all disappearing. We mentioned Gabor's earlier. That was gone. The other big one was there was this bar on 18th and Glenarm called Shelby's that, again, had a long history as a neighborhood bar, and it was also David Wondrich named it as one of Esquire's best bars in America. The way the downtown was getting gentrified, all these places were disappearing. And so this was my way, at first, of documenting it, but also, since I'm from the East Coast, this is not my city. I'm looking at this city through an outsider's eyes. And it was a way to learn about my wife's city. So that was the way I came around to the Queen City book. Like to basically plant a flag, this is what Denver was like in the early 21st century. This was Kerouac's city, this was more importantly, it was Neal Cassidy's city. And their city is pretty much long gone. I mean, there's hints. You can look around the corners and see hints of that old Denver, but you have to kind of look for it.
We've been chatting with Karl Christian Krumpholz, author and illustrator of Queen City. Of course, we're going to drop some links. Thank you, Karl.
Oh, thank you. This was fun.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.